Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 235. Today on the podcast, Jen interviews Leah Archibald about workplace ethics and making good decisions. This is particularly important if you can't afford good lawyers.
You're listening to the Careers by Jen podcast. I'm your host, Jen Swanson. This is the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Careers by Jen is a listener-sponsored podcast, and if you like the content, please consider supporting the show as a patron. You can do so for as little as $1 a month. Head over to CareersbyJenn.com and click on Support to learn more. What's right and wrong at work? Big questions, and sometimes not easy answers. Today, my guest is Leah Archibald. Leah is a content development specialist at the nonprofit Theology of Work Project. Leah is also the host of a podcast called Making It Work, and she has just written and released a book that came out in the past few days, and she will tell us about that book in our conversation. Leah's focus in all that she does is to shine a light on a Christian approach to work, to help people experience more meaning and fulfillment in all areas of life, work and outside of work. And if you are not Christian, I think you'll still get some good stuff out of this conversation. I began by asking Leah how much of who you are as a person influences what you decide is right or wrong at work.
Oh gosh, what a fantastic question. Well, I think the answer is 100%, right? We're 100% influenced by the person that we are on the outside, but strangely enough, we're also 100% influenced by the forces that were around us. And there's this real push and pull. So when we think of an ethical dilemma that you might face at work, that's where you're facing a question, I really don't know what to do. There are these two factors at play. They're all the forces that are coming on you. What do your boss say? What do your clients need? What do your coworkers say? And then there's this internal, what kind of person do I want to be? And there's really a tension there that it takes a lot of character to navigate. So whether the decision is coming 100% internally or 100% externally, or some mixed percentage, internal, external, really is a question of character, which is something that builds over time, but that we also show moment to moment.
And I wonder also if it has to do with authority, because it depends on your role at work, I think.
It sure does. And something that I've seen as I've talked to other Christians who have, I'll go back. Something that I've seen as I talk to other people who have dilemmas that they face in their work is often people believe that they have less power than they actually have. Often people believe I'm just doing my job, just doing the job that my boss told me to do. I need to deliver on these things that my coworkers are asking me. And they forget that, we have so much power in our individual roles at work, not just to do our job and to do our job well, but to manage up to authority, to speak up to authority, to show the values that we have and bring them into our workspace. At least that's something that I didn't realize, when I was a younger worker first coming into the workplace, and it's taken me a long time to really come into that on my own. I'll give you an example. When I graduated from business school, I went right into a tech startup. We were selling online marketing for, big tech corporations, and we were like a 7-person outfit. And I came on a high-level marketing role, and I was all excited, to do a bang-up job. And a year into this role, it really became clear that the company was going downhill. It was kind of actually going downhill fast. It was, we need a buyout within the next 2 months, or everyone's going to lose their jobs. So I was really in this tricky situation personally. I invested a lot of time in my first job out of school, and the company was going to tank. How was I ever going to get a job after this? All these fears. And so we had this buyout proposition. We had a much bigger company come in, and there was some investigation to buy us out. And my boss came to me. I was in the marketing role, and he said, you have to prepare the numbers. You have to show this new company what our audience, what our reach looks like, and you got to make it look good, because all our jobs are riding on this. So I did my job well. I created the documents. This is what our audience profile looks like. This is the million people they're reaching, and this is their job titles. And he came back to me and he said, I like the work what you've done, but it just has to look a little bit better. It's like, what do you mean a little bit better? This is actually what the data says. Well, this percentage of our audience, these people aren't really interested in our product. Let's just take them out of the spreadsheet. And this is our audience. Well, this isn't really our core audience. Let's put these guys under the rug. Let's take these ones out. And then we're going to get to the really meat of our audience, that's like high level CTOs. That's who we're really reaching. And that's who we want to focus on, do the demographics on that. And I had an ethical dilemma, I really did, because on one hand, what he was saying kind of made sense. Well, that's not really the core of the audience. On the other hand, he was taking this big figure number, wherever our top level of users was, and, just shifting the demographics ever so slightly to throw under the rug a percentage of our audience. And, in that moment, I had a lot more power to speak up than I thought I did. I could have said many things. I could have said, I don't think this is a fair representation of our audience. Like I said, I don't personally feel comfortable. You can do this if you want, but I don't feel comfortable. And I didn't do any of that. I thought I had so little power, and I had so much fear about losing my job that that I did everything he asked me to do. I doctored the numbers. And that decision, it took me, several years to unravel in myself, how ill that decision sat with me, and all the negative ramifications of that decision. And today when I talk about ethical decision making, I say, there's three frameworks that you can use. You can look at whether there's a certain command that has to do with the decision you're making. You can look at the consequences of the decision. You can look at your character, what you want to be. So the 3 C's, command, consequences, and character. And they get more difficult as you progress. So like a command would be, hey, Leah, is this thing that you're doing legal? Like that, is there a command against this? Is there a law against this? Maybe there is that I wasn't aware of, or maybe I was aware of it at the time and I swept it under the rug. Certainly like there are commandments in the Bible, my faith tradition that certainly like point against the exact thing I was doing. Proverbs 11:1 says the Lord detests dishonest scales. And certainly I was rigging the scales a little bit, in that certain decision that I made. So is there a command against it? That's the first level. But at the second level, what are the consequences of the decision that you're making? And this decision, which I thought I had no power to make because my boss was asking me to do it, actually had much longer reaching consequences for me than it did for him. Because for him, his company got bought out, he got a big payoff, and he was happy on his way. For me, I transitioned to the new company, and I had a new employer, and I had to continue my job and keep working with this, fictitious audience that I had created, or, there's some consequences to my decision, and that I had portrayed our audience a particular way. And then when I couldn't deliver the numbers based on that audience, it made it difficult for me to do my job. So there are definitely consequences to that. But then the third C, character, that's where it even sat with me, the decision, a lot longer. Character is when you ask yourself a question, what kind of person do I want to be? And do I want to be that kind of person only at home or at church on Sunday? Or do I want to be that kind of person every day on my job? And this decision that I made to, I guess you would say, to portray my, company's audience incorrectly, really sat with me for a long time. That's not the kind of person that I want to be at work. So, when I thought of all the forces affecting me in that moment, how much power did I really have? I didn't in the moment weigh, the power of my own convictions, which I really swept under the rug, thinking that I had no power from the external circumstances. And I wish I had made a different decision today. If I were to go back, I would have made a different decision, but it's certainly a learning experience.
That's the whole thing about hindsight, right? You can imagine all the different scenarios that you would have done, could have done after the fact, but it's being able to step up in the moment And as you say, there are so many factors involved in that. And I wonder if it takes a certain amount of self-reflection, self-awareness, or maturity to be able to then begin to live out of your character, as opposed to being afraid. As you said, there was a lot of fear, and fear particularly about losing your job.
I think it takes a practice of pausing. I agree with you that it does. Character is something that we develop over time. But our character develops every moment that we make the right decision. So it's a catch-22. Is it something I have at the end of my career after having done the right thing over and over again? Or is it something I get in the moment choosing to do the right thing? And the answer is yes. Yes, both of those things. Every time you choose to follow your convictions at work, you are building your character so that it becomes stronger over time. And here, let me go back. I'm trying to remember the exact question that I was getting to, and I lost my train of thought. You're saying, is it a process getting to that point of character where you can make the right decision at work? And I think the first step of the process, something that people can practice every day, is taking a pause. Often we think when we have a dilemma, we think it's an emergency, and we think we have to make a decision very quickly. The brain chemicals start flowing, and we say, "Oh no, I have to solve this right now." And often we do have the time to take a step back and pause and reflect. And so I certainly had time in that situation to take a step back, think of the 3 C's. Are there any commands that have to do with this that I might be breaking? What might be the consequences? Maybe I could write a pros and con list, or maybe I could map out what are 3 different scenarios. What are 3 different directions I could go in? What are 3 different options I could give to my boss, and list the consequences of those? And then I could take a step back and think about my character. What kind of person do I want to be? And what does each course of action show about my character? And certainly, I think email makes us think we have to respond so quickly. But there's always a tomorrow. We could always sleep on it and respond to an email tomorrow. No one has ever died from not getting an email back this afternoon. I think we have a lot more leeway, especially when it comes to right and wrong at work. We have a lot more leeway than we think we do.
And I think it's wise, if you're sending something as a reactionary response, to wait and not send it instantly, and just think about it a little bit before you send it. I guess also context makes a difference, and the relationships that you're in with whoever it is that you're in a dilemma with. I know that my son ended up quitting a couple of jobs before he's now in the job that he's in now, but he quit a couple of jobs, and he did so because of ethical decisions, things that were going on that he didn't feel were right. And he quit. One of them, and I think I may have mentioned this before on the show, but one of them being he was selling very fancy vacuum cleaners for a while. And he said at one point, he said, I just spent the afternoon with this really, really nice elderly woman who probably doesn't need a vacuum that's going to last 20 years because of how old she was.
She needs someone else to come in and vacuum her house for her, probably.
And probably doesn't have $1,500 or whatever the crazy amount of money it was to spend on this amazing vacuum. And he says, it just doesn't feel good in my gut to be doing this. And the woman was willing to actually buy it, and he ended up stopping the whole thing and quit because he said, I can't do this. And I thought, good for you, for going with that gut and going with what feels right inside you. And, other people, might not have a second thought around that, but he just didn't feel good about it. And I thought, well, there are some times when you have to make a radical decision in order, because he wouldn't have been able to continue in that work had he, had he kept decided that and then kept going. It wouldn't have worked.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes our right and wrong decisions are discrete events, that come and go and we can make a decision and it's done. But sometimes there's a pattern in an organization that you come up against over and over again. And then it's time to think, is this really the right organization for me? If the people that I'm working around with don't share the values that I have, or if the job that I'm doing really isn't similar to my values. There's this beautiful image in the Bible of, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. And then there's this also an image, quite later in the letters talking about being unequally yoked with someone else. But the images of a yoke, I don't know if you can picture like a team of oxen, two pulling cows who are pulling together, and they have this big wooden thing on their shoulders, and it helps them pull in unison so they can both pull this big plow behind them that's too heavy for each of them. And the point is, one of them can't do it, without the other. But if they're unequally yoked, then one will pull too hard, the other will pull too lightly, and they'll just go around in a circle, and they'll just have a little circular, field of dirt, and they won't plow anything. But if you're equally yoked to whoever you're working with, then the work is easy, and, you can plow the whole field, keep going forward. Just like Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light because I'm doing it with you. So that is a long-winded way of saying that people that you work with have an effect on how much work you can get done. And they also have an effect on you. They have a long-term effect on your character. Many people aren't in the situation where they can just up and leave their job, because there's something that they don't like going on in the organization, and then you kind of have to think through, how can I make sure my own actions reflect my values? How can I manage up? How can I influence the organization-wide culture through my own actions? Those are other questions you can ask. But if you do have the opportunity to evaluate your career, it's a big question. Am I yoked equally? Are we pulling in the same direction? Do I like the direction that my company's going in, based on my values?
And you could ask, I imagine you could ask for help. You could ask for someone else's opinion. You could ask a trusted advisor. You could go to a supervisor if you trusted them, if it wasn't a case in which, if it was a case in which you had autonomy and you could make the decision. There would be someone else that you could maybe have the conversation with before you make the decision, and take the time to do that if you're able to.
Oh, absolutely. And there are if you work in a big organization, there's a whole HR department who's designed to do this. That's their huge function. And, something that happened in my case, my small company got bought out by this big organization, and here I was, and and I had made a bad decision of my own choice, cooking the books, as it were. But there are also bigger problems in this large organization. There are managerial problems. I was working under a new person who was really having a hard time integrating this new team, and I went to HR, of this new corporation that I was in. I said, I'm really having a hard time integrating, and there were a lot of questions I'm working through. And I had a great, confidential conversation with the head of HR about it. And she gave me a lot of ideas on how to, she basically told me how the corporate culture worked, and, what were my options and what were my options for moving to another team. And at any rate, I found the interaction extremely helpful. And what I find about HR professionals is that they want to help people. That's why they got into the business. And certainly if that's not available to you at your particular job, I would say ask a mentor if there's someone in the industry or someone you trust or someone who's been in your career but a couple years down the line. Because I find out over and over again, I don't know. There's a lot that I don't know. There's a lot I think I know, but there's also a lot that I don't know, which is why it's so important to get feedback from other people.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable piece of advice, is to talk to your human resources, your HR people. And some companies have an employee assistance program. One of the other things that I do in my other work is I do corporate training, and I go in on behalf of a large extended benefits program and do lunch and learns on wellness topics. So I work closely with a lot of HR departments in a lot of different companies, and talk to people about wellness and mindfulness and stress reduction and all these different topics. And the program that I work for actually has a counseling division where you can phone as part of your benefit package, your medical health package, is there are, X number of counseling sessions available for free, completely confidential with clinical counselors. And I always encourage people, if that's part of your benefit package, don't wait till you're in a crisis. These counselors will talk to you about, the stress of your workplace and the dilemmas that you're in and all of those things as well. It doesn't have to be just crisis counseling. And I think a lot of people seem to forget that they might have this piece of benefit in their package.
Or sometimes people think if I have a crisis, it's going to be a home life crisis or a marriage crisis or a personal health crisis. People forget that the decisions that we make every day in our work often affect us. And they affect us, at a crisis level subconsciously, but we don't necessarily think of it. We're, oh, that's just my work, or, that's not that important. But, making a right or wrong decision at work, especially something that might have consequences into the future, that's the level that you could, I don't want to say crisis, but if you get a crisis counselor, avail yourself of that. That's the level that you definitely could raise it to another person and have that be very helpful.
Absolutely. And I come back to context. I spent a lot of years working in the hospital system and saw multiple instances where there were ethical decisions that needed to be made in a healthcare setting. And, I remember there was one particular physician, and it didn't matter what was happening with the patient. His inner conviction was to save life at all costs, no matter what. And that was what he did. And there were situations where nurses were begging him to stop with the code blue, the person's in an arrest and they've been working on this person for hours, and, the person's quality of life was going to be awful if they did come out of this, and ribs are broken, and, it just went on and on and on. And this person, had some dread disease anyway, and was, very elderly and all the rest of it. And everyone else is like, let's just stop and let this person slip away. But that was not in the makeup of this person, and it was absolutely not. And he would just continue until it was absolutely, completely 100% not going to work, or work, one or the other. And so that was, an ethical decision taken on by an individual. And it was fascinating. Thank goodness I didn't have to be part of that decision making because I thought, I don't know how I could decide that. Because I could see both sides, and so there are situations, depending on the context you're in, where literally the decisions are life and death. And I think that has to be so hard, So how do you manage something like that?
I was about to ask you, I was going to say, Jen, what do you do? What would you advise that person in that situation? I think it really just does point to the fact that there are not easy answers. We call something a dilemma for a reason. If it wasn't a dilemma, it would be a commandment or something you're supposed to do. Maybe you're supposed to do, but you don't want to do it. You got to drum up the energy to do it. But no, that's not a dilemma. A dilemma is really, I don't know what to do. When I was facing my dilemma at work, I really didn't know. Is it right to say exactly the truth point by point, or is it right to save the jobs for these 7 people that I work with? That felt like a real dilemma to me at the time. There aren't always clear-cut answers, and that's why I think it's helpful to point people to a process rather than to, here's what you should do. You can't serve up the answer on a plate, but thinking about a process of going through, okay, is there any command here? Any rule that I can look at? I can do some research there. What are the potential consequences? I can do some brainstorming. I can ask other people in my field, someone higher up who might have more experience. And then the soul searching part. What is my character? What kind of character is revealed based on either of my choices or, one of my 5 choices. And you might have to kind of like walk yourself in your imagination down the road a few weeks or months or years and saying, how would this affect my character if I make this decision? Or if I make the decision now and another decision comes up a week from now, how will the first one affect the second one? And how will that affect my character? Right? Because we get to take that character with us. We have to take our character with us, when we leave our job and go to the next one. We can't shed it like a suit of clothes. It goes along with us. It's something that we build over time. So it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, if there was any way that we could know, then we would live without regret.
Yeah, gosh. But life would be so uninteresting, if we saw the future. There's this really neat, there are a bunch of passages in the Bible. There's this really neat one in Philippians 2:5, where the writer of the letter encourages people to be of the same mind. Let you be of the same mind that was in Christ Jesus. And I think that's impossible. Right? That's not a possible thing for me to have at this moment, but it is a possible thing transformationally over time. So day by day, I can have more of the, mind of what I would like to be, and before that verse, the advice that he gives in order to get there is to do nothing out of selfish ambition, but to think of other people more important than yourself. So I think that's the key for me. I can't see the future. I don't know the consequences of my actions, but I can, follow some principles and say, okay, if I want to my character become more like this, I could probably follow some of these principles of less ambition for myself, more thinking about the people around me. How would that work in the situation? At least that can give me a clue into the way I might want to act.
And the other thing there too is the question, is, am I looking after my own self-interests in this decision, or am I looking after the greater good? So am I doing this for the whole, or am I doing this for selfish reasons? So that's just another way of looking at, how do you make your decision? Is this to save my own hide, or is it to or what? Because that could be a reality. And in some cases, maybe you do decide because of that, save your reputation, save your job, save yourself a whole pile of work. I don't know. But is your decision being self-serving, or is it serving the whole? And I guess that's why you can take a whole degree in ethics.
You sure can. It's not simple, and sometimes doing the right thing leads to the right outcome for you. Very often we have this podcast called Making It Work, where we interview other folks who are going through a hard time in their life and come out on the other side and say how their faith led them through it. So I was just having a conversation with a gal who was talking about managing up a time that she had to, tell the boss of her corporation, actually, I think this marketing plan is, maybe has a couple racist undertones, and I don't think it's the right direction that we should go in. It was a very challenging thing that she had to speak up against, and it worked out for her in the end. She stood up to the CEO of her company, and the CEO said, actually, I like that you're a straight shooter, and I know that anytime I'm going to come to you with a question, you're going to tell me the right answer. And, it led to her, having some career advancement in his eyes, but she could have equally gotten fired. That could have been her story too. She doesn't know. So there are many, there are tons of stories where you do the right thing and it turns out well for you. And those are the great stories. We like to hear those and pat ourselves in the back, but you equally do take a risk, right? You take a risk of things not going well for you. And I think that's where, so you get to weigh the consequences, but at the end of the day, you get to look at your character, and say, well, how does this reflect on me? What kind of character do I want to have? And how does this decision play into that? I think that's what this lovely woman who I chatted with the other day, how she came to that decision of, am I going to speak up in the moment or not? And she said, well, how do I want to, when I put my head on the pillow tonight, how do I want to think about myself? She wanted to think about herself as someone who stood up for the underdog. And that's why she said it. And it did turn out well for her in the end. So that's a happy ending story.
Well, and wherever you go, there you are, right? So, so you want to be able to live with yourself, as you say. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially at work, where you spend a lot of hours of your time. I talk to so many people who are just waking up to the idea that, work could be a place that I bring all myself. It could be a place I bring all my values and all my interests and creativity. And for a lot of people, that's a new idea. We think we live in the non-working moments, and then the work is just a grind. I think the more we can bring all of ourselves, including our values, into our work, the more joy we find in our work, the more alive we feel at our work, when our faith is really alive in that too.
I love that. And I'm all for bringing your whole self to work. I think that's, I wrote a book a few years ago called What They See, How to Stand Out and Shine in Your New Job. And I talk in there about what other people see and whether or not what you are bringing is what you want other people to see, and how to bring your whole self to work, and especially in the first 3 months of your new job. And yeah, it's how do you bring all of that with you? And I do talk about values in there, and how your values will not necessarily be the same as the person you're sitting next to, and what are the commonalities? What are the things you can work together with that person on? So yeah, it's good. Where can people find you, Leah, if they want to learn more about you and your podcast and all that you're doing?
Sure. They can go to makingitworkpodcast.org. And actually, we'll put resources, everything that I've talked about today, we'll put it up on makingitworkpodcast.org/CareersbyJenn. And at that URL, I'll put a link to there's a devotional reading plan that I've written. It's been completed by 250,000 Christians online. It's how to make the right decision. 4 days. You can get it on your little Bible app and read the Bible and some case studies from business about how to make the right decision and go a little deeper on that. So that's at makingitworkpodcast.org/CareersbyJenn.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you. And what's one last piece of advice you would give to the listener today?
Oh gosh, one last piece of advice. Well, I would say if you're facing a difficult decision, if you're facing a right and wrong decision in your work, it's not an emergency. You can hit the pause button. You can take a moment to reflect and think, gosh, when I go home, when I leave work today, what kind of person do I want to be? How does that reflect on my character? And you can just project that vision of going home and just bring it right back here into your desk right now and say, what kind of person do I want to be? You have a lot more power, a lot more options than you think you have in this moment.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. It's been rich.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Jen.
You've been listening to Careers by Jen with Jen Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. If every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.